We do not think our continent is going to be developed using charity or handouts or arms or tokens. We have talked in our continent about potential. And this guy keeps telling me it's over. The time to talk about potential is over. Move it to opportunity, move it to investment. And the way to do that is to make sure that our situation in the continent is such that we have equal opportunity like everybody else. For a very long time, we've had a wrong argument. We've tried to blame this person and the other person and engage in a toxic, unnecessary conversation. What we're now saying is, look, we want a win-win outcome. We have assets as a continent. We have enormous renewable assets. 60% of all renewable energy is in our continent. 30%, maybe 40% of all critical minerals are in our continent. We have 60% of all arable uncultivated land today, and we have the youngest population. These assets must count for something. And all we are saying is, how do we work to convert our assets from the potential they are today into opportunity and into investment? And we have given 3 areas. We've said, first and foremost, let us deal with the elephant in the room. That for us to access resources for development, we pay 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 times more in the financial market. Reason? The rating agencies, risk analysis, sovereign debt frameworks are, let me not use the bad word rigged, but it is something almost there. Because these rating agencies assign very high risk to our continent. What we end up doing is that we pay interest more than others, and that is the reason why today, of the 10 countries that are in debt distress, 6 are from Africa. All of them are in the developing world. Because if you're paying 8 times more, you're set up for distress from the beginning. And that is the correction we want to make. We are saying the rating agencies, the risk analysis frameworks must be reformed. And let me tell you, it works both ways. The reason why we ended up in a financial crisis in 2007 is because of the same rating agencies. They were wrong that time. I bet you they are wrong today about us. We do not want favorable treatment. We want fair treatment. If others are paying 2%, let's pay 2%. We shouldn't be paying 14%, right? I think it's just fair. Number 2, we're saying for countries that are almost in debt distress, 52 countries, Secretary General of UN said yesterday, 52 countries representing 3.4 billion people are either high risk or moderate risk in debt distress. We need to pull back these countries. We need a mechanism that pulls back these countries. We have suggested that, number 1, let us do a longer term tenure of their sovereign debts. Let us put in there a grace period, 5, 10 years. This will give them a breather because it is no longer possible to do development without doing climate action, because those are one and the same going forward. And finally, is the biggest elephant in the room. 2 aspects. We have said that it is now time for us to leverage on the balance sheets of the multilateral development banks, create additional concessional resources, $500 billion, it's possible. Let's look at liquidity challenges. How do we go for another SDR facility? We went for it during COVID. Why can't we go for it to deal with debt distress and to deal with climate action? It is time we have a conversation, a candid conversation about carbon tax. When we say carbon tax, others say carbon pricing. It's an escapist ideology. What we want, and we have said this, is we are ready for a carbon tax on fossil fuel trade that is administered at a place and at a level where settling banks can collect that money. It is the only way we are going to get adequate resources to unlock the potential we have in renewable energy. Today, investment in renewable energy, 2%, only 2% get to Africa. Of the $300 trillion that was invested in renewable energy, only $54 billion came to our continent. It is time we got that much leverage on investment capital, because what is standing between Africa and our opportunities are investment capital, and that is what we are looking for. And we are saying, unless we reform the financial architecture, we will continue to be in a circus. We will remain at potential. We will never get to the opportunities that we have. And just to confirm what Adesina is saying, it is in bold print in the Nairobi Declaration, exactly what she has said. Revaluing our assets so that we are valued for what we are worth, not what people think that we are worth. And just two final things. Very fundamentally, listening to Adesina, I had a meeting with Kristalina, I had a meeting with Banker. The MDBs can resolve this. What is lacking is goodwill, political will. But it starts with us. The people in the African continent, we need to speak with one voice, and we don't need to speak in murmurs, and we don't need to speak in low tones. We need to speak loudly about what our situation is. It is possible for us to elongate, to create longer tenure sovereign debt facility. It doesn't require rocket science, and it can be done now. Grace period can be done now. SDRs, they were created for the pandemic. Why isn't it possible for us to create SDRs for climate action? It is an existential threat facing humanity. The economies, the two economies that are about to go down the debt distress, isn't that serious enough for us to think about this? So the solutions are there. The MDBs can do this. And that is why we are unrelenting until it is done. And I like what my sister here said, that as much as we are talking about the credit rating agencies and risk analysis, you're right, we don't want for them to be defensive. They need to be defensive because they know what we are saying is right. Exactly. They know we are talking the truth. And they know that the whole algorithm around these credit rating issues is not fair. And all we are saying, good people, is it too much to ask for fairness? I mean, really, that is the basic minimum. That's what we are saying. We just want a fair system that serves everybody equally. We do not want to be treated unfairly. We do not want to be rated unfairly. We just want to be rated for who we are and what we are worth.
And President Ruto, you've said this in every forum before President Emmanuel Macron, with Ursula von der Leyen, with every major leader from the global north. Do you feel like you're getting heard?
They are listening. I can tell you they are listening. I can bet you they are listening. The conversation about reform of the international financial system was in murmurs a few years ago. Today, it is being talked by no less than the President of the United States. They have come to the realization that it is no longer possible to run the system the way it has been run. So everybody is reasoning. What is now remaining is the how. And we are going to show them the how.
Yes, sir. Mr. Diab.
One fundamental challenge at the center of all of our development concern today is the need of reform of the global system, particularly as it relates to development financing. There is no question of the urgency for global reform and the needed mobilization of financial resources. Whether we're talking about financing peace, financing infrastructure, financing the means to resist climate change, financing the energy transition, financing the fight against poverty to employ young people and women, or financing our education and health systems, the need remains the same. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while echoing the ardent aspirations of the African people, our Continental Development Agenda 2063 also opened up a wide conceptual corridor inviting African desires to surpass themselves and aspire to an even better future. The Global Africa Business Initiative is designed to accelerate the promotion of business, trade, and investment on the continent. This objective also constitutes the real dynamic level capable to create the expected and shared prosperity. In doing so, this forum directly and indirectly assigns a crucial role to the private sector. Although the role of the private sector is universally recognized, it is still hampered in some aspects by a series of handicaps that limit its capacity to create and innovate. The African private sector will benefit both for itself and for Africa if it were bolder in accepting and taking risks to create wealth and achieve prosperity. We need to have a little bit more of a spirit of adventure and the acceptance of the demands of such a spirit. It is therefore my sincere hope that this Global Africa Business Initiative Forum will become a strong and effective part of the continent's effort to defeat such challenges and open up horizons to a new era of reform on a global scale. But Africa cannot win alone, not in a world as interconnected as ours. She will certainly win more by first relying on her own strengths, but never against others, never without others. Unstoppable Africa is vital for a shared global future. Thank you for your kind attention.
His Excellency the President have said very clearly what is done in terms of looking at the architecture as the fundamentals of what needs to be done. But unfortunately, sometimes these things take time, and unfortunately, the continent they cannot wait for this time to happen. So I think that there are opportunities here that are before us, and we were talking about it many times, and I think that one of them is agriculture. I am really...
They're both former agriculture ministers of their countries.
But let's...
And we love each other.
Let's talk about it, okay? As His Excellency and my brother Akin said, the potential is here. Let's stop talking about the potential, okay? Let's talk about what needs to be done to move it. Today, in the conversation of climate change, which is important, 90% of the conversation is about mitigation, little about adaptation. Adaptation is mainly water in the African continent. I lived in Kenya.
Yes.
I saw the impact of drought. I'm coming from the Sahel. I'm from Senegal. The conversation was not heard in the past in climate change. Why? To be true is because it was not affecting the most advanced country. Now the south of Europe is facing drought. The western part of the US is facing drought. I think that the next COP should be an opportunity to make a strong commitment about investing in water and to allow agriculture, African agriculture to move forward. Second, climate change and the new economy on climate change. This is a high time when you're talking about diversifying the supply chain, geographically, and so forth, to use the opportunity of the African continent to be able to be part of the supply chain on coming from the lithium to the battery. So there is no reason why today in the continent, with the competencies that we have, with the resources that we have, with the African Free Trade Agreement, which will allow to build very robust supply chain on the continent, that we are not a player in the battery space. So I would like to bring the conversation also to some of the verticals that we could work on to be able to move the needle on this. The third point for me, which is important, is that we have an opportunity also to diversify our economy and make it much less prone to these shocks. We have in Africa today, we talk about fertilizer crisis, but one of the largest producers of fertilizer is in Africa, OCP, is in Africa. They are ready to work on the market. So what I would like us to do is to take, with my brother Akin, we have pushed for the private sector alliance in Africa to do that, to have more means to do inter-Africa trade.
About the issue of debt and the issue of the rating agencies. He's absolutely correct. Take a look at the situation with the debt resolution in Africa. It takes a long time. We had the multilateral debt relief initiative. Okay, highly indebted poor countries. I don't like that term. How can you be highly indebted? You're poor. It's like you're not going to survive any way you look at it. Yeah, but you have a situation where Africa is paying so much debt to it. And as the world is leading with global inflation, and you have contraction in monetary policy, it's driving up interest rates. The amount of money that Africa is paying for debt is going up. We're paying 18% of our GDP right now, going to debt. But the rating agencies, as the president says, they downgraded 61 countries during just after COVID. 61 countries. 60% of those were in Africa, right? And so we've been talking about ourselves, why is it that for the same amount of risk, exposure or rating, Africa is paying 700 basis points or more than those in other parts of the world, based on what you call the Africa risk premium? No, we're not rating Africa fairly, justly, and I think in a transparent way. They're not as risky as others, and I'll close on this point. We financed, Larry, a study by Bloomberg, Moody's Analytics. And what did they find about loss in terms of infrastructure? Africa's loss globally on infrastructure is 5.5%. In Asia, 8.5%. In Latin America, Caribbean, all that, 13.5%. And are you telling me that there's a high risk of actually investing in Africa? No. And so these are the president did not want to use the thing. I'm not going to say it's rigged. I just want to say it's unfair. And that's why fundamentally, whether it's on climate, whether it's on debt, whether it is the way in which we do ratings, and whether it is how we do global conditional financing to deal with global shocks, we have to make sure Africa gets a fair, equitable treatment. And the global financial architecture, both in terms of structure, conduct, and performance, has to change. The president and I in Nairobi, we were talking, and he is a fantastic president. He's very focused, and he's driving a lot of agenda for us in Africa. We were talking about our wealth. How do we measure our wealth? Africa is rich in natural resources, in forests, in biodiversity, and all of that. But why is it that we are rich in natural resources and cash poor? And that's because our natural capital is not part of our GDP. Who says GDP is the best way to measure your wealth? In fact, the reason why we are in the mess we are today is that we've been using the wrong measure of wealth, in which you produce wealth, regardless of the technology and the externalities you create globally. So we have said, what we are going to do is we take, Commissioner is here for AU, we take the whole of the forest basin, Congo basin, like President and I talked about. It sequesters more carbon than the entire Amazon. Many people don't know that. But Africa gets nothing for that. No, we're not looking for charity. We want to turn our economies green and make sure that the value of the carbon that we sequester is accounted for. And what that means is this. If you have a revalued and rebased GDP based on your carbon and the natural capital, your debt to GDP ratio goes down. You have more headroom, you can borrow more money, and you can do more green investment. So that's where the green wealth of Africa is. That's where the trillions are going to come from. We are tired of being nature rich and cash poor, and we're going to change that. And we are way behind, and way off course when it comes to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. The UN Secretary General says that we're totally off course on that. Africa will need $1.2 trillion, right, per year to be able to be on course for that Sustainable Development Goal. But we're not, the global financial architecture is not delivering those resources to Africa. The president was talking about the whole issue of climate change. It's the same situation. You've got a continent, 9 out of the 10 countries that are most vulnerable to climate change in the world are in Africa. It loses $7 to $15 billion a year to climate change, and we think that's going to rise to $50 billion by 2030. But how much is the global climate financial architecture delivering for Africa? That's the question, right? We're only getting 3% of it. 2021, we had $653 billion of global climate finance. Africa got only $30 billion of that. Okay, so you can see there's a lot of inequities in that. It's very difficult for African countries to access those climate finance. It's very, very long process. It's a very tedious process. It's not transparent. You don't have a lot of African representation on the boards of many of these climate financing institutions to be able to access that. And worse, Africa faces climate adaptation. That's what we've got to do. But how much are we getting for climate adaptation in Africa? Well, $11 billion. And that has to rise 10 times. And I want to commend His Excellency President Ruto for the leadership that he shows with the African Climate Summit that we had. And this is one of the issues that we discussed. But let's come back to another inequity that has been there. We can't walk away from this issue, Larry. But take the COVID situation. How much was the fiscal response globally to that? They got $19 trillion. The G20 developed countries, right, got about $15 trillion of that. And how much do you think Africa got? $83 billion, 0.3% of the global. And so we have to start thinking about scale, speed, and adequacy. The fact of the matter is, while the rest of the world was trying to get booster shots, right, Africa could not afford just a single basic shot. And I'll tell you one other inequity in the system. We have conditional global financing that goes because of shocks, and we have the SDR reallocation, which Mr. President, I'll come back to that later, Mr. President was talking about. Well, you got IMF, and Kristalina, my sister, did a great job, and Secretary Yellen, fantastic job, but we got $650 billion. Out of the $650 billion, Africa got only $33 billion for a continent of 1.2, 1.3 billion people. You know, so you can see there's an embedded bias, okay, on Africa when it comes to this particular issue.
The number of facts that have been put on the table here and that Africa is using to make these arguments, that starts to begin a fair fight and, frankly, a productive discussion. The second is representation. The fact that the African Union now has a seat on the G20, the G21, is huge. Maximizing that presence is going to be key because Africa can change the discussion. Prior to the last summit, the discussion at the G20 has been countries representing 60% of the world's population. Now a lot more of the other 40% can show up. That's a different conversation. The last thing, as an observer and somebody who's worked on these issues my whole life and with many of the people here, I think the biggest game changer is the unified voice that is coming out of the continent. When there's a common position from heads of state, from finance ministers, from civil society networks, that is power.